Chants rang out in the square.
Death to the traitors! God's punishment for those who defy the king!
Thousands of people surrounded the execution ground set up in the center of the square, raising their fists and shouting loudly. A young man dressed in worn rags and riding a horse rushed to the scene, jumped off his horse, and pushed his way through the crowd to the execution ground. There were 2 gallows at the execution ground, and a young man and an old woman were hung beside them with their wrists tied together. They were both motionless, with their heads bowed, and looked so weak that it seemed likely they had died before their execution. Beside them stood a soldier, each holding a curved, hooked sword. To the right of the execution ground was a special platform set up for viewing the execution, where the king and queen, accompanied by many vassals, sat on ornate chairs. They were laughing and drinking as if they were having a party to celebrate this execution. In front of the execution site, strong soldiers stood in a line to keep the crowds from getting any closer. Pushing through the crowd, the young man somehow made it to the execution ground, and, ignoring the soldiers who tried to stop him, shouted out the name of the man awaiting execution. Orgos, he shouted repeatedly, shaking off the soldiers holding him down. But Orgos still didn't respond.
He's one of the traitors. Hang him too.
The captain, wearing a horsehair-adorned helmet pulled down over his eyes, pointed his sword at the soldiers around him and roared. Catching sight of the captain from the corner of his eye, the young man immediately recognized the man's true identity, even though he still had his helmet on. The young man lost his mind in anger. He put his hands into his pocket and waved them at the soldiers who were trying to arrest him. Taking advantage of the soldiers' hesitation, the young man tumbled onto the execution ground and ran towards the gallows. Such an execution should not happen. Absolutely wrong. Orgos, the young man, shouted with all his might. Just wait. I'll cut that rope right now. He felt a heavy impact on his back. But he couldn't afford to worry about that. Without looking back, the young man ran. After that, he received a number of blows to his back. He was just a little bit closer to reaching it. But his body refused to grant the young man's wish. The will that seemed indestructible no matter what hammer was used was easily crippled by both his legs. A few steps before Orgos, the young man collapsed to his knees, his dagger still raised in his hand. There were a number of arrows stuck in his back. Is it possible that I'm going to die here? Neither Orgos nor Emerua could be saved. Writhing in pain, the young man looked around. Orgos came to his senses, his eyes wide open at the tragedy that had unfolded before his eyes, and shouted the young man's name as loud as he could. However, it seems that the young man no longer hears that voice. In the square, where people were buzzing with excitement at the sight of the hunt that was taking place before his execution, only the young man's body was enveloped in eternal silence.